recorded live.
Hello, and welcome to the Virtualization Security Roundtable podcast, episode number 111. We've been doing this now for 222 weeks. Joining us today are our panelists, Eben Rodriguez, who is an IT industry veteran, now serving as Director of Virtualization and Cloud Testing for NSS Labs in Austin. Michael Berman is a subject matter expert in security virtualization, working at TidalScale, a stealth mode startup. It's still stealth mode, right, Michael?
Still.
Also joining us is Mike Foley from the VMware Technical Marketing Team, with focus on security of the vSphere platform. Welcome, Mike. Listening in is also Tim Pearson in his virtualization security class up there in Canada. And if they have any questions, feel free to put them in chat. We'll gladly entertain them. And my name is Edward Haletke, a.k.a. Texawil, on just about everything on the internet, and author of the book VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security, as well as a few other things. Go ahead and look them up on Amazon. And joining us later, hopefully in the podcast, should be Gene Kim, who used to be one of the people in charge of Tripwire, and has written a book called The Phoenix Project, which is all about DevOps and how it moves and works with security and a few other things like that. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about this time. When you start talking about DevOps, and I know Gene's not here, but let's go ahead and start that. I mean, when you read through the Phoenix Project, and if you haven't, you probably should, even though it seems like a fairly contrived story, what's your guys' experience with DevOps and security? Anybody? Eben, you've read the book. You've been trying to implement this everywhere.
Yeah, I'll start. DevOps means a lot of different things to different people, and I like the way the book was sort of in a novel. It's one company's sort of Acme Inc., if you will, experience. It's an example, in my mind, it's an example of how things could go. Obviously, different companies have different people involved, but it's amazing how similar many of the characters are to people that we've all worked with, many at different companies even. So, you put them all together, you kind of have an average company.
Oh, yeah.
From the security department who it feels like they are fed up and don't know how to make a difference in the world and, feel like giving up, to the developers who are always complaining about their code not working right in production, to the production team always complaining about the developers' last-minute changes. I mean, on and on and on. These things he puts it together in a novel. I've tried getting a lot of my friends to read technical books that I like, and nobody wants to read a technical book. And the way it was put together in a novel makes it easy to read, and it's a way that people can actually relate to these technical issues. It talks about the software development lifecycle, compliance and GRC with regulations that you need to adhere to, whether it's SOX or HIPAA and different things, and working with third-party developers. It's amazing. It's just great. I loved it. I just can't say enough good things about the book. And is it contrived? Yes, it is contrived, of course, but I feel like it's a collection of many people's experiences to show examples of the challenges people have in big companies and small companies. One thing I will say is it's not for the smaller companies. It will look very contrived and fake if you're a very small company. There's no way you could do a lot of the different things that are talked about in the book. But when they talk about the different departments, if you have a security department and if you have a separate developer team and separate operations team and an executive staff and multiple buildings on your campus, even a distributed campus, then it's more applicable to that type of environment, a larger enterprise. I'd say at least maybe 300 people and up company who's been in business for many years. They have a lot of baggage that they have to deal with. It's not something as a startup company you'd read this book and say that you can apply a lot of the things right away. That's my
Actually, as a startup company, I would think you could apply a lot of what's in there immediately.
Well,
as a brick and mortar, you've been around forever, it's a little bit more difficult.
for a startup company, it's more, here's some challenges you might run into if you don't take care of these types of things now. That's the way I look at it for a startup company.
Yeah, and the perspective on a startup is somewhat different, right? At a startup, you typically are operating in fast change cycles with very tightly integrated teams that blur distinctions between development, security, and production operations, because you're kind of building it as you run it, right? And the difficulty that a startup faces is then maturing those processes, right? Whereas
often the maturity of those processes leads to basically
leads back into the siloing, which DevOps is meant to fix. So it's kind of like a very different sort of. It's useful to embrace these concepts, but what you're defending against is kind of the opposite encroachment. Where I think if you're coming into an established company where you want to use DevOps and integration of security into DevOps to break the silos, it's a different cultural battle, perhaps, right?
I'm not so sure. I mean, I've been in several startups that have had actually extreme silos, where you work on your project and no one else works on anybody else's project. Matter of fact, you only talk through the management chain. That was the way they had it implemented. If you had a question, you had to go through these guys. So it was actually extremely siloed. DevOps would have sped things up. Walking into someone's office and just asking them a question was almost unheard of.
Yeah, that's foreign to me in my experience with startups, but I hear what you're saying.
It only happened once, and I think it was more cultural than it was anything else.
Yeah.
And
hey guys,
Mr.
this is
Kim,
James running
you
late.
just joined us.
Yeah, sorry about that. I heard every bit of the conversation, but I was unable to get myself unmuted. Sorry about that.
So, Mr. Foley, you've read the book. What are your thoughts?
Well, first, hello, Gene.
Hey.
I used to work for Brandon Williams at RSA.
Oh, fantastic! A mutual good buddy of both of ours.
Yes, and so now I understand why about a year or so ago he was going on and on and on about Kanban and all this other stuff, and I was like, what the hell is he talking about? And then I read the book, and it all became clear. We had a good laugh over that. I really enjoyed the book. It's a work of fiction, but it would have been incredibly dry if it wasn't. I was reading through the book, and I was saying, I know that guy, I know that guy, I was that guy, I was Brent at one point in time. It made the whole DevOps story, especially with regard to security, approachable. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people have a problem with is how do we start talking about this? And security guys never want to be the first one to lead. They always want to step back and let someone else make the mistake. And I think the whole I've been recommending the book left and right to people. I want them to read it and then talk to me, because a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about for years, it's like you put it into a work of fiction.
So now
thank you.
Now the book becomes the path of the constrained path, right? For anybody that wants to talk to Mr. Foley, the book is training path.
Don't talk to me unless you've read Gene's book.
Well, it's funny, right? I had a similar feeling, right? Is that there's a certain sort of conversation you have where you're trying to get someone to sort of see, the reality that you see, right? You've seen the dead bodies. Someone's going through and denying that these dead bodies exist, and part of the motivation of writing the book is like, hey, look, here's what it looks like, right? And here's how to, and what's horrible is that. What's interesting, right? What's gratifying as an author, right, is when someone says, "I know," when, like exactly as you said, right? It's like I've lived this before. This is what I'm living through now. But a friend of mine, Steve Feldman, he said, Stephen Fishman, he said, this book is like a dystopic vision of IT, right? And I kind of laughed until I actually looked up what dystopia means. It's the opposite of utopia. It's a fictional device, to be used to sort of describe how bad things could get. It's like, no, this is actually, this is the reality that we all live in. So we are living in the perfect dystopia.
This is normal operation.
Which is actually, for me, actually forms the basis of a moral crusade, right? It's like, everyone, if this is the world that we're living in, right, how important is it that we actually fix this, horrible, dysfunctional, environment that we live in as IT practitioners, whether we're dev, ops, or security, right? And I think the security actually gets the brunt of all of this, right? We live with the downstream effects of all the poor decisions made upstream. So I think it's an especially acute cause for information security practitioners.
Absolutely. And actually, Gene and I have another story. We were actually at Purdue at the same time, which was kind of interesting. We just never met there.
But you were in the beautiful buildings in the engineering department that were shiny and new, right? And where I was in the math and sciences building that was, I think, condemned and torn down shortly after I left.
No, the wind tunnel's still there the last time I looked. Underneath the side building was a area that had a ramp going up on either side of it, so when the wind blew, it acted like a wind tunnel. I actually saw one person walking backwards under there, trying to get through. It's pretty funny.
I think the math and sciences building is actually gone.
Oh, I haven't been back in years.
So I have a question for you, Gene. The characters in the book, how much of them, are they amalgamations of people, or are there specific people that are very much like the characters in the book that you used?
In other words, much reality is really there.
Yeah.
I would say they're an amalgamation of, the people I've met on my journey, right? And they were kind of combined in specific ways, right? Wes is like the embodiment of, the person who says no to any idea. You don't even need to finish your sentence before, he says no. Patty is the embodiment of someone who wants more processes and controls, right? Which, I think represented a great majority of my career. So Wes is the director of distributed operations. Patty is the director of processes and controls, service support. And then John, the CISO, right? I mean, John is a shrill, hysterical person who's been marginalized by the organization, right? Where, everyone knows that the real way to get work done is not to invite him. But John is actually a very special character for me because in so many ways, right, I was John, right? I mean, I know what it feels like, to, feel like, everything that you are working on feels like a moral crusade, right? You're having a moral argument with someone as opposed to a business argument, right? And I think, and those people exist whether you're in InfoSec or operations or even development, where you're really having to fight upstream to, put in the countermeasures to reverse the effects of these sort of catastrophic forces that are at play in the Phoenix Project. But what's really interesting to me is like some really good friends of mine. I got to know from Paul Love. He was a co-author on the Visible Ops Security book. He was a E5 in the Marines. He was a CISO. He was the director of security. He said, "I got so mad at you, Gene, when I read the book because I hated John, and I felt like you're just being a real bastard for characterizing security this way." And then he wrote me like a day later. He said, "Oh my gosh, I just realized the reason why I hated John, the character, so much was because I was John, and he just didn't like it. Just made him feel very uncomfortable seeing him depicted in kind of a caricature way, which just, I'll be honest, that's one of the most delightful comments I've gotten in this whole journey."
So Gene, when you wrote the book, I mean, this is really, when you think about it, the book is about a death march to the end. And if you don't change things are going to go south extremely quickly. That's not going to happen in many companies immediately. It won't be immediately noticeable or anything like that by the rank and file. So if you have a medium to large enterprise, how do you
I disagree.
Implement something like this without actually having the death march mentality?
Well, it's funny. I've gotten so many notes from large organizations where the CIO is making this mandatory reading for their entire organization, right? And I think for a couple of reasons. One is that they view kind of the story being told in the book as a relatively high fidelity representation of what they're going through, right? Just saying this project we're working on is the Phoenix Project. And I think it's more than just a death march. It's the behaviors that lead to the Phoenix Project outcomes, where you have huge releases that fail spectacularly, right? And suddenly you're not hitting any of the goals of the organization, whether it's project due date goals or availability goals or security goals or compliance goals. It's almost it's a side effect of human nature, of when we do painful things less frequently, it almost guarantees and preordains the horrific results that you see in the Phoenix Project. So the mitigation we're asking for, right, is that you have to do painful things more frequently. You have to release more frequently. You have to get security embedded into the daily work of development and operations, right? So it's not engaging us at the end of the project. We need to affect the daily work you do. And, I think that's just not an InfoSec problem. That's just an organizational management problem. And I am just delighted by the conversation that's being created by the book, and the recognition that so many of the practices that are being described as DevOps seem suddenly very relevant to organizations, not just in the unicorns, of like Google, Pinterest, Etsy, LinkedIn, so forth. I mean, in the horses, right? The enterprise IT shops where the failure is preordained in the unicorn companies just as much as it is in the horses. So I'm actually very optimistic that this is a transformation that will become far more common, predicated by the fact of what Dr. Deming says, right? Survival is not mandatory, right? So I think my hope is that when people recognize themselves in the Phoenix Project, that they will become far more motivated than ever to be able to sort of take the countermeasures described in the book.
So, but how would you, these aren't something that you can actually implement from the bottom up. You actually have to implement them at a management level. Some manager says going to have to go, our team leader is going to have to say, this is what we're going to do.
Well,
but that's within your own silo. How do you cross those boundaries when the other side just doesn't want to play?
Yeah, that's a good point. This is Eben. Hi, Gene.
Hi, Eben.
Yeah, we've seen
Welcome to talk.
Yeah, we've seen companies do this at the grassroots level, but very hodgepodge, There's actually a couple companies I worked at recently where they didn't mandate at the executive level if you're going to do waterfall project management or agile. And companies were free, departments, application teams actually were free to do their project in their own way and using their own tools. But at a certain point, that becomes inefficient, and that's where a savvy CIO or some executive will help sponsor these sort of unifying initiatives. But it doesn't have to start off that way.
Yeah,
but even so, you're talking about, we always say IT and then we say security and we keep the two separate when really they're really together as one team in a lot of ways. They almost always report to the same C-level all the way up.
Well, that's
when
also
you start
changing.
thinking about that way, when you start thinking about IT and security is different, well, you've already broken yourself. That's the first thing that's got to change.
It's already changing with cloud and people using Amazon and
I'm not so sure.
Services.
I think security is being ignored in those cases, not being included.
Well, if I may, right, the cloud is not a panacea for some of the problems we're talking about, right?
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, no, IT projects fail more. I think half. I've always heard 50% of the time, right? That 50% of IT internal development projects are deemed a failure. Either missed milestones, missed costs, missed deliverables. Probably all three. And that's not necessarily security's fault, although maybe security is contributing to this. This is like a bigger conversation about how we in IT, in our industry, do these things, how we build products, whether they're external commercial ones or internal ones. And the other thing that's very interesting here, and I've heard this quoted many times, the average CIO lasts in his or her job 18 months. And if you think about the big project life cycle, how long those take.
Just long enough to screw it up and get out.
And that number, it kind of falls in place. So I think when you talk about these things, or Gene was talking about, a particular C-level saying, everybody in my organization needs to read it. Some of it at the C-level, it's kind of like a matter of survival. It's like if you can't fix this process, then you're trapped in this sort of 18-month cycle of being, circulating the valley or circulating around different jobs because you're just never really successful. And if we want to be successful, we have to change the process. And then to your point,
and that's what the character Bill Palmer was basically told right in the beginning, right?
Yeah, it just depicts kind of a different reality. I mean, one of the most inspiring security talks I've seen in ever was a specific talk that was given by the InfoSec team at Twitter, right? Essentially, this was a team that was put into place after the Barack Obama account got hacked, and they were slapped with the FTC injunction that thou shalt have a security program for the next 25 years, right? And the sort of transformation they told, I think, was just startling. I mean, in order to solve the problem, they built this tool called Brakeman that does static code analysis every time developers check in code. But more than that, it actually does static code analysis every time a developer hits save, right? So, developer, hits Command W, right? And they might get an email that says, hey, we just noticed that the code you wrote, just introduced a possible cross-site scripting risk, right? And here's how to fix it, right? And then when the developer fixes it, they get one more email that says, thank you so much for fixing it. Congratulations. Please rate, how helpful the advice was, right? Mm-hmm. And in my mind, in 10 years, this is the way InfoSec work will be done, right? I mean, it is the days of doing a security review at the end of a 9-month project where, it's too late to actually take corrective actions without jeopardizing, the market commitments. Those days will be over, right? I mean, if an information security group cannot get integrated with that level of involvement into both dev and ops, I think there's a certain level of preordained failures that exactly like you were talking about. If you can't get in early,
but we've been talking about that for years. So it's like we really need at the time of check-in or save or whatever you're going to do, however you're going to do it, some sort of analysis. And we've been talking about that for years. And you're saying Twitter's doing it. I think that's great. But how many other companies are actually doing that? When I talk to the Fortifys of the world and the other static code analysis tool companies that are out there, they have no way to tie into these repositories even today. They say, script it yourself. It's like, well, why? You know how Git works. You know how Subversion works. Tie into it yourself. Provide me the tool.
I was just going to say, speaking from my current experience with Git, making this part of a Git commit hook it's very simple. And even in your choice, and I think there's a lot of variability here. So let's just say, given a development environment, you can choose tools such that you get the effect that Gene just described at Twitter, or you choose otherwise. But it should be a conscious decision, and this is a very interesting thing that I've run into recently, is that where I'm working, we use a particular tool called Clang, C-L-A-N-G, for those of you listening out there. And it's essentially an alternative to GCC. And so you might say, well, why Clang? And why Clang is because Clang does a marvelous job of pointing out mistakes you've made in your code. And it does both static code analysis and even more than static code analysis to do this. So, you can choose tools, and then you get this information, and you get better results. Every time you save your file. Certainly every time you save it and Git. Yeah.
One of the slides that I've had in my deck for years now is that tech is easy, business, people, and process are hard. And the real issue is not a technical issue. The real issue is getting people to sit down, work together, figure out the best thing for the business. And I think that is one of the driving points in the book, is that you need to take a more what is the best thing for the business as opposed to the best thing for you. And the issue of I'm trying to remember the scenario around the audit where the security guy was just hell bent for leather on I've got to do this when it really could have been handled differently. And that's because no one was really talking to him and including him. So he was off doing his own thing, which ends up being more costly to the business or potentially costly to the business when it could have been handled better somewhere else. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people really don't grasp because they're so wrapped up in their own silo and it's really the job of management to pull everybody back out of that silo and say, here's how you and your people affect the business. And if you're doing it this way, you're having a possible negative impact on the business and your job.
I love that. So one of my late sort of realizations, after putting the book out there, is this the impacts of having shared services. So let's not talk about InfoSec for a moment. Let's talk about operations. So one of the reasons, why operations is so vilified by developers is that they're always in the way, right? I mean, these 5-minute changes take 9 months to do. It takes 42 weeks to, get a test environment, right? And by the way, InfoSec, we're not immune to this, right? A 30-minute firewall change takes, 60 days to do, right? It's the same sort of phenomena. And the countermeasure, and part of this is just because of utilization, right? Is that, if someone's 80% utilized, I think there's a graph in the book. If you're 90% utilized, your wait time is going to be like 50 times higher than if you were 50% utilized. And so when you're split across many, many different teams, it's very difficult to actually deliver what the teams need. And so I think a realization in the DevOps movement is that you need, small teams, 8 to 10 people that span the entire value stream. So that means architecture, development, operations, InfoSec. And that's how you kind of get the right sort of behaviors. And then these people know best what's good for, quote, the business. I mean, they are the team that's trying to achieve the business outcomes. Similarly, I think the implication for information security is that, the more we can embed people, InfoSec people, into those teams, I think those are what's going to cause sort of the right outcomes. So you don't have someone like John pushing all these controls that are not they're either not needed because they're covered someplace else, or they're not relevant. And I think, the reason why John was wrecked as a human being was that, for 3 years he had made this moral crusade to push for, these controls. and the auditor came in, who was supposed to be his best friend, and said, "No, you're right. There's some downstream controls that negate the need for what you're pushing for, John." So, I think one of the things that only management can do. Yeah, exactly. So, sorry for the long-winded response here, but it just seemed relevant to what we were just talking about.
By that same token, shouldn't the two teams, that the audit team and the security team, actually be talking so that everybody knows that these downstream controls exist? When you don't know that, it makes, as Mike pointed out, just makes a huge amount of work for everybody. And when we're talking about the cloud and virtualization, you actually have more than just a security team involved. You may actually have the legal team for cloud. You may actually have the QSA reports of the cloud provider themselves that have to be gone through. You may have the auditing team on site. You may have actually misclassified data, so whoever classifies data needs to be part of that. And then you also have the virtualization team that's moving workloads back and forth. And when you don't think about it, if you think about that one thing, audit is monstrous. It's a huge problem. And that doesn't even start talking about identity with audit, because you can't. How do you identify something or someone in a cloud that then can be used to do that audit?
One of the things, if there were one thing I wish every InfoSec person would know about the DevOps community, is that, as Josh Corman said, DevOps is waiting for us, meaning InfoSec, with open arms. This was one of my favorite talks I've heard at the Velocity Conference. Was given by a gentleman named Theo Schlossnagel. He said, DevOps is a terrible term, right? I mean, it's prone to misinterpretation. It's not inclusive enough. He said it should be called star ops, or more pedantically like dot star ops, or like every department wildcard star ops. Because he's asking a question like, where's InfoSec? Where's network engineering? Where's the DBAs? Where's product management? And I think, when you're working with a team that has a desire to have fast flow of features, meaning high deploy rates, short lead times to go from code commit to successfully running in production, and they care about reliability and availability, they actually do care about InfoSec. And so now we don't have to have this shrill, hysterical moral argument, right? It's like now we have a moral match, right? And now it's a question of how, not what. And so, I mean, if there's a discussion that I would just love to never have again, is like why people need security, right? Like in the DevOps community, they know we need security, right? You can't be available if you're being hacked all the time. So
hey, Gene, one of the scary things though is that as you integrate operations into all the different groups, not just development, what happens is the operation team becomes less relevant because now each group is doing operations. And so instead of DevOps, what you hear about is no-ops. And that's really, when the storage team doesn't have any infrastructure maintained anymore, they can just go push a button. There's no operations team needed to maintain that storage. And security gets baked into the application. You don't really need a security team anymore. So the no-ops movement is really the other way of looking at it. And people are worried about their jobs, I think is what we see happening. There's some fear there.
Yeah, and I totally want to acknowledge that narrative, right? The no-ops thing, even though the person who kind of said that would, like Adrian Cockcroft and Cameron Haight, I think they'll acknowledge it was not intended in that way. So there's this one narrative that says, the logical outcome of having DevOps practices in place is that we will have no more ops anymore, right? So 80% decimation of the IT operational workforce. And by the way, let's throw in security there as well. I think the narrative that I believe in is that a lot of the low-value operations work that's manual and repetitive in nature, right, the least creative, the most horrible work in operations, that need for those are going to go away. But I can give you empirical evidence that when people are actually embarking on this transformation, the thing they realize most is like, oh my gosh, the Brents, these operations engineers who can actually kind of automate the deployment process and automate monitoring and build the glue between development and operations, there's like not enough of them. The one CTO, he said, if I could find 40 of those people, I would hire them on the spot. Right? We should close out. We should get rid of 40 development recs and hire 40 ops engineers. Right? If only we could find them. So I think it just shows that when you start moving the ops people and InfoSec people into the various value streams, into the product teams, I think the opposite is going to happen. You're going to need more ops and security people than we ever had before, right? So, and it's actually going to deplete available supply. So, I actually believe that's going to be the narrative. There are going to be a lot of jobs lost, like in manufacturing, but it's not because we need fewer people. It's because the companies that don't figure this out are going to go out of business.
Right.
Well,
you're really talking about the... Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry. That and the skills are changing. And those ops people, the folks who have been doing things the way they've always done it, which I personally believe is grounds for an audit, the ops people are bringing, the Brents of the world are bringing skill sets that other people just don't have. And it's the same thing as going from making buggy whips to Model Ts. Folks who could make buggy whips were left in the cold. And that's just a fact of life. And I think a lot of people don't like that. And that's one of the challenges. It's one of the challenges.
Let me play devil's advocate to that one comment. And that is...
You play devil's advocate?
Well, let's look this way. How many virtualization security people are there in the world?
There's me. There's you.
There's the ones
on
the
phone.
500? I mean, to be honest,
or is it 50,000?
I like my niche, by the way.
but there's not a huge number of people in that area. But there's
Right.
a huge number of people that are in the security area.
Right.
And think that they are virtualization and cloud security experts. So the question is, what happens if the Brents of the world automate everything, including all the security controls and everything like that, and then something breaks? Who are you going to call on when the Brents of the world are no longer around?
Well, the Brents don't disappear. I mean, what happens?
Well, no, you're talking about, I mean, let's think about this way. The Starship Enterprise, there's only 3 people on the whole of the craft that could probably fix it out of 50,000 people or whatever the number was.
Well,
in a company, if there's only 3 people that can fix the problem and they're not available, you're up a creek.
You know, no, it doesn't work that way. I mean, look what's happening.
I don't think so either.
Look what's happened in the audit. Let's go back. Mike brought this up at the Model T. Let's look what's happened from really since I went to high school till today. You know, cars. The car I had in high school that I knew how to work on pretty much doesn't exist anymore. And it slowly got more and more technical and more computerized.
Mm.
And you know what? We still need mechanics. We still need people who work on cars. They just do it differently.
Right.
You know, and they don't, you know, a lot of the things they used to do, like adjusting spark gaps, they don't do that anymore. I mean, you know, it just is not a necessary skill. But there are other skills that are necessary, more in many ways more sophisticated, more educated. So yeah, there is a problem. If you can't open up that technical manual and figure out computer diagnostics and necessarily tune the computer or tune the mechanics to match what the computer specs require, then yeah, you can't be an automobile mechanic anymore. Isn't that interesting? Right? Well, automobile mechanics are pretty darn sophisticated technically now. And this is what we're talking about, right? I mean, I have a friend who used to describe. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing that's changed, you have a common framework now. There's things like OpenStack and CloudStack. I mean, how many cloud platforms are there? There's not a whole lot to deal with, and you're going to be more likely to find experts in these than if there were 100 of them.
Well,
this is awesome,
right? I mean, there's going to be a huge area where people who have puppet expertise are in demand, or what? It doesn't matter. I mean, so what? We don't need router monkey. I mean, this is what I was going to say. I got a friend who used to describe himself as a router monkey, right? He spent his whole day, updating ACLs and routing tables. Okay, he doesn't need to do that anymore. Is he out of a job? Far from it, right? He now spends his time at a much higher value, doing things that are more important for both, operations and development than he ever did before. But he almost never touches iOS. That's fine with him.
In fact, I have a buddy. He's an engineer at a multi-billion-dollar company, a developer, and he said, it's like, wow, none of us are DBAs, none of us are networking guys, right? We have these chronic performance problems. We just want, we need someone with ops experience, right? And we don't even want to give him work to do. We just want him to pair a program with us so that we can take what's in his head and get that embedded in the code. And I think from personal observation, I think what happens is, in fact, there's a guy named Brian Carpio. He wrote this development automation tool inside this large enterprise. And he said, just because we've made it push button, right, because we automated the deployment process doesn't mean that we're done, right? There are a ton more buttons we need to build, right? And and he, when he brought up, like, he had this sort of sadistic laugh. He's like, he called this technology Nibiru. It's like this Mayan god who's supposed to, it's I think the name of the planet that's supposed to crash into Earth and wipe out all life according to Mayan legend. He named it Nibiru because it almost like to agitate the pain. But he'd laugh at it, like, we're not automating anyone's job away, right? There's so much work to be done, right? We need more people with shovels, not fewer people. And I think the narrative, says that the Starship Enterprise is still going to have 430 people on it. It's just fewer people moving stuff around by hand, and they're going to be working on higher value work. How many people on the Enterprise? 420.
I totally agree.
You've displayed an inner geek, Gene, that now we all know is deep and broad.
No, I'm obviously talking about the original Star Trek, the only one.
Obviously, yeah, because the modern Enterprise D under Picard had much higher number. And that's the point. There were more crew people in the next generation. I think that's the point. They needed more people on the starship, not less.
Exactly right. So I just, and I wish I thought through this narrative more. I mean, I think another proof point, right, is in the manufacturing, in automotive manufacturing. Yes, General Motors has fewer people in manufacturing, but if you take it across all automotive manufacturers, there are more people working in automobile production than 30 years ago. It's just distributed differently.
Right. There's a lot more white-collar workers working in automobile production. You know, when you, I can't remember how many CPUs are in a Tesla, but it's amazing how many are in. I mean, all of that, there's code that needs to be written. You know,
and it's not just that. Think about all the industrial robots that upset the line workers at the time. Spawned. There's a whole industry now of people who make and program industrial robots, and there's a whole industry, of modeling and graphics and CAD/CAM, because it was one thing to say to a human being, make this widget that looks like this picture, but if you want a robot to do that, there's a hell of a lot of work you have to do to program that robot.
Right. I mean, how many people in auto parts? How many people in auto parts industry right now are freaking out about the ability for people to print their own parts using 3D printers? Jay Leno has a 3D scanner and a 3D printer, and he had this car that had a very unique door handle, and it was missing one of the door handles. So he took the door handle off, had it scanned, flipped it, all on the computer, printed a new part using his 3D metal printer or machine or CNC machine, and next thing you know, he had a brand new door handle.
Edward, by the way, Ken Smith is trying to get into tweeted you on Twitter. But by the way, I love this scene. It was like some sort of Nova special about electric cars, and they actually got the guys from Car Talk to join, and they popped the hood, and the expressions on their face was like, "Oh my, yeah, I don't recognize anything under there." It just kind of shows that we still need car mechanics, but they might not look like the car mechanics of the 70s.
Right.
But they'll be making a hell of a lot more money than the car mechanics of the 70s.
Right.
Right? Car mechanic in the 70s made, the equivalent today of $10 an hour.
Okay, so what is our recommendations? I always like to tie this to something people can do today. What is the recommendation that if you are a security person or a virtualization or a cloud guy today that you can do? And you can go to your manager and ask about what is the thing that we would recommend to do.
What's the moral of the story?
What's the?
I've been thinking about this a lot.
Let's put the metal to the foot to the floor here, and let's get some real good advice for people to say, if you were today and you had a problem with not being able to communicate, what do you do?
It should be my recommendation. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this since AppSec USA. I think. And this applies as much to as operations people as security people, is that if the days of pen testers being able to give huge PDF reports to a client and being unable to pick up the shovel and actually fix the problems, I think those days are coming to an end, right? So, and for the ops person who's been relying on the BMCs and HPs and so forth to dictate their career roadmaps, I mean, I think, those days are coming to an end as well. I think what the most critical capability is, the ability to code so that we can automate things. And so, I would, if I were in a place where, so for InfoSec practitioners, virtualization security people who are used to living in a tool, I think get any sort of training that increases our ability to code and automate things in whatever language that is relevant to the ecosystem. And keep asking a question: what skills do I need to be able to pick up the shovel and work alongside of ops and dev to fix the problem? So instead of pointing at it, to actually fix the problem alongside dev and ops. And I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, if you're a security guy today and you're your IT team, number one, if you don't know what your IT team's doing, go find out. If they're starting to march down the DevOps path, it's time to look at whatever tool they're using, go learn it yourself, and then put on your security glasses and figure out how can I embed security into their DevOps rollout. So if their IT team is doing using Puppet to create a whole bunch of VMs, well, wouldn't it then make sense, because it wouldn't then make sense to start coming up with Puppet recipes or manifests that can say, if you build a Red Hat Linux VM using this manifest, it will pass DISA-STIG compliance, rather than IT building that VM and then you coming in afterwards and, just like in the book, reworking the part, because that's expensive. You know, I've already heard of where people can get a VM provisioned in minutes, but then security takes 3 weeks to approve the VM to be used.
So I'm gonna say exactly the same thing in a different way.
Don't be the roadblock.
Exactly. There you go. So I really like that part of the Phoenix project is looking at your IT operations from. So let's use the example of getting a bunch of new machines, whether they're virtual machines or servers or what have you, for your project. What is it from start to finish that needs to happen? Looking at it like an assembly line and figuring out where the roadblocks are and automating or working around that, taking those roadblocks away, either through automation, maybe outsourcing, or adding additional resources as needed. That's the number one thing that I'd say, and where I see myself playing and a lot of the people I've been working with is automation, and specifically using a common framework. We hear about Puppet, Chef. There's a few other tools that Salt that's getting more popular. And it doesn't matter which one necessarily. Pick one that your company's using if you're going to be at your company for a while. If you're looking at possibly changing jobs, ask around, go to user groups, look at Twitter, find out what automation tools people are using. One of the popular cloud management systems that's getting a lot of attention nowadays is OpenStack. So I see myself spending a lot of time on that.
I love it. In fact, just to resonate with you guys, I mean, it's interesting. I've seen a lot of security practitioners show up at, PuppetConf, at ChefConf, and it's fascinating to me to see who's showing up there and what talks are not being given by InfoSec practitioners. Some of the talks about like how to create hardened security environments are not being given by kind of people that I would expect to be giving those presentations. So it just says that there's a need here, then if we don't step in and fulfill that need, someone else will fill it, right? And that's how we get aced out of the game.
Well, not only that, I mean, you think about it, you guys are talking about not being the roadblock and all that, and also learning the right tools. But if we're going to be talking virtualization and cloud, security should have been part of that initial conversation. If you weren't, you need to join the table, get to the table somehow. Just go in and sit down and listen and find out what tools you need to learn. And then once you know what they are, start learning them, because you're the security team has the chops to do the security work. The virtualization or cloud team think they do. They may be overlooking something. But don't get in there. Don't tell them they're doing something wrong immediately. Don't tell them to stop. Just find out what they're doing, how they're doing it, and suggest alternatives that fit inside the environment. It means you have to learn the environment
and be part of the team, part of the process. That's be part of the basic thing, right? Is that the traditional, maybe that's the wrong word, but the customary role of security at the end of the process, to say yay or nay, that's got to change.
Absolutely.
The last scene in the before I get there, one of my favorite little nuggets that I read about came from our mutual friend Josh Corman and his burnout study. Where they found that the rates of burnout in InfoSec are higher than that of first responders, physicians in the ER, people doing multiple tours of duty in the military, right? I think it's just kind of a horrible indictment of how awful kind of the status quo is for InfoSec practitioners. And, I think this vision that you're painting where you can show up at the table, right, and just like my buddy at this company, right, says, like, we're looking for ops people with very specific expertise. It's like we don't even want to ask them to do work. We just want have them sit by us and we'll do the work. We just want to ask them questions. I think that is what ends up leading to what you're talking about, right? The feeling of inclusiveness, right? Instead of being marginalized and being aced out of the game, we're being included. Our expertise is respected and needed, and we're helping the organization win, right? We're helping the team win, and I guess the last scene in the Phoenix Project, just to show you what a geek I am, right? It was kind of constructed like the scene in my head was like the last scene of like Return of the Jedi, right? It's kind of like the celebration, right? And even John, the CISO, is a part of that celebration, right? To me, that was kind of like, in my mind, the ultimate kind of happy ending that shows what it feels like when everybody, when InfoSec is actually being told thank you,
That's an awesome real-life story as well. I've seen that happen in a couple companies where they have started DevOps and they've been successful through some rollouts, some big project completions, is the barbecue they have at the end. They'll invite the ops guys. And when you see the ops guys show up, you're like, wow, this is something cool we have going on here. That's really kind of funny, but it's happening more and more that the barbecues are where you can see the results of this.
Well, it's funny you say that. I once had that exact same conversation where I said the best way to start this off is go out to lunch, right?
Absolutely.
Stop going out to lunch with, your friends from security. Go out to lunch with everybody. Make it social, make it cross the domains.
If I could just sort of tighten up that language just a little bit, you go to where the value stream is, right? So the security team is not the value stream. The value stream that we need to embed in are, the product team that includes product management, dev, ops, DBAs, network engineers, maybe even the cloud service provider, right? So that's where our sphere of influence needs to be, and our sphere of friends.
Yep, awesome, exactly.
Wow. Well, everybody, thank you very much for joining us on yet another podcast. We got 5 minutes left, so some last thoughts. I know we asked for some things that you can do today. What about you? What are your last thoughts? So I have a question for you, Gene. Is this going to be an indie movie next year?
Made for web TV.
Yeah, right.
He would.
It's directed by.
No, shown at South by Southwest.
Starring Mike Foley as Brent.
No. You would need a shower scene like in The Cuckoo's Egg, and then you could make a movie out of it.
My goodness. And Beaker as John.
Oh, that would be great.
I've actually met a number of players from the beginning of The Cuckoo's Egg.
Yes.
I worked with Wayne Graves and Andy Goldstein and a whole bunch of others.
Awesome. Yeah, by the way, Cliff Stoll, love that book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By the way, I did look it up on the internet. There are 430 crew members on the Starship Enterprise and 800 on the new one.
There you go. That proves the point.
Yeah.
Wow.
We need more people, not fewer.
That's right.
And less than 1% can actually less than 1/3% can fix the machine, fix anything that's broken.
Scotty is Brent.
You just fix it differently, Ed.
All you need is a tricorder and a visor, and you can fix anything.
That's right. The analog is funny screwdriver, right?
It's usually Wesley that ends up fixing something there,
Shut up, Wesley. So I think my big takeaway from all of this is, number one, read the book if you haven't read it already. And I don't think any of us here would say that lightly. It puts it into perspective where things are going in the industry. It's one of those. It's one of the canary in the coal mine things that you should be doing is going through, reading the book, and understanding what is happening in an IT environment. Next, if you're an IT guy, please reach out to the security guy and get him involved in what you're doing. Make him part of the process at the beginning, not tack him on at the end. Otherwise, you are doomed to failure in the long term. And then if you're the security guy, sorry, dude, you got to come up to speed really, really fast on what's going on and how you can add value to this new process that is really starting to take off within IT.
And if I may, let me chime in on that. And if you are that security guy, more than likely, because of being the security guy, you have a diversity of skill sets in networking and systems and other areas that actually make you very valuable to these teams because you have this perspective that in some ways is much broader than the typical development or even operator perspective. And you can bring and contribute a lot to this process because you have these skills, not just in regulatory compliance, right, which may also be very valuable, but in just because, any of us who've had to be the hacker or think how the hacker works, we've had to broaden our skill set and understand networking systems and how these things play together. And that makes you valuable to making an application that works better.
But the problem, Mike, is that a lot of times you can't come into it with the same attitude and the same way of operating, right? Instead of saying you can't do this or you can't do that, or it needs to be more like, here's how you should do it. There's
this is how it's
change in language that needs to happen.
Yeah.
So as all the other guys on the podcast have heard me say a number of times ago, 2 years ago at a VMworld, security guy stood up and said, "I put the no in innovation."
Yeah,
Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy.
Yeah. But, it's so funny, right? I mean, one of the reviews I just really love about the Phoenix Project was a guy named Jez Humble. He wrote the Continuous Delivery book, which is kind of a seminal prerequisites to DevOps about how you get fast flow and development processes. And he said, in the Phoenix Project, the real Phoenix is John, right, the security guy, right? I mean, he's the person who actually changed the most. And just as you were talking, Mike, it's like, I think by finding this kind of different role, we actually become different people, and we contribute at a much higher level. I think it will genuinely change the tag cloud associated with our profession.
So
and
I
think
like
that's
the way he
only a good thing.
His style of dressing as well. It sort of signaled an internal change when he dressed up differently.
Well, this is Ken, does that mean we all have to
clean the spittle off his mouth?
Hold on. Does that mean we all have to get drunk? We all have to get drunk and go put all our belongings in a trailer and plan to leave town? And
you got to go through this transformation.
We're going to have an epiphany.
No,
wait a minute. Get drunk? Suit? You guys aren't drunk already?
Hold on, Mike, let Eben finish, please.
Sorry.
So I'd like to hear Gene, since he's our guest today. Can you describe in just 2 minutes the dress code transformation he went through, how he started, and sort of the sequence for the security guy, just for the podcast in your own words? Because we've all read it, but I'd like to hear you talk about it, just your words.
If someone could Google this real quick, it's a movie about casinos that had Pauly Shmacey in it. And so in this movie, he was called the Cooler, I think. So the transformation was kind of modeled after him. So before he was always this depressed person who just managed to kill whatever hot table was going, right? Just so when people would start winning too much money, they would bring him in, right? And all of a sudden, the table would go cold.
The movie was called The Cooler. William H. Macy.
Right. So, like in the kind of DVD notes, right? They actually showed how. And then he fell in love, right? And then he became, this wonderful, happy person, right? And but unfortunately, he lost the ability to cool the table, right? So the casino hated him, right? And he lost his job and whatever. And so the pre-transformation John, he kind of dresses in clothes that are a little bit too big. He's gained too much weight from trying to be on this moral crusade for 3 years, where he's only been marginalized by the entire organization. That is a very thankless role that I think too many of us are familiar with. And so he goes on this bender right after he gets basically eviscerated by the auditors, and the Yoda character calls him says that he has no business telling anyone to do anything until he can gain an understanding of the flow of value and so forth. And he then disappears for 2 weeks. People are having bets whether he got abducted by aliens, quit, killed himself, all of the above. Right? And the new John is dresses in very tight European discotheque clothing, right? Very, he's lost 30 pounds, but it's meant to sort of represent more confident John, that where he appears to be taking far more risks than ever, right? Because he's become enlightened and can actually understand what it takes for the business to win, and sometimes that means taking risks that a classic security person would say over my dead body, which I've learned can quickly be arranged.
Right on. Thank you. That's awesome. Have we made any progress on a sort of taxonomy or study guide of the Phoenix Project book, sort of to break it down as a reference?
Yeah, shoot me now. I'm going to post. I've just put a link of where there's a reading list for more resources that were seminal in the development of the Phoenix Project. We're still working on the DevOps cookbook. I'm hoping that will still come out in winter of 2013 or 2014. We're still plugging away, but it's taken a lot longer than we thought. But you can see a lot of
a live document as new tools come around, and like we were talking about Git for source code, and Michael had this other one, Clang, I think. There's always going to be new tools and new ways of doing things. It'd be great if we said these are the types of things you have, not necessarily exactly which one you should use, but here's the things that you should do.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I think the way we're trying to structure the book is it's principles and patterns, right? Because those can be timeless. And then the actual technologies and techniques, right? Those can live in a wiki page, right? Where
awesome. Well, if you need people to look at that and review or provide input, let us know. We're very happy to help.
Oh my gosh, I will take all your help on that. And if anyone's interested in getting an early peek at that, just email me. Just put the subject line cookbook, and I'm GeneK@realgenechem.me.
And that website is go to http://itrevolution.com, and you can go from there and learn more about the Phoenix Project. You can probably also
and
find it on Amazon and Kindles and everything and anything, and hopefully Gene's thinking about a movie and all that and who would play the characters. I'm sure everybody would have a blast if we did that. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on this episode of the Virtualization and Cloud Security Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
shoes. Recorded live.
Welcome to the Virtualization Security Roundtable podcast, episode number 112. We've been doing this for almost 3 years now, which is a long time. In a month is VMworld, so if you actually are not signed up to go, I would highly recommend it. There will be lots of cloud and virtualization security talks, as well as hallway talks and vendors at the show, well worth going to if you're in this world. And it's not just about VMware products. There'll be talks about KVM and Xen and Hyper-V as well. Expect them there. My name is Edward Haletke, a.k.a. TechSciWill, everywhere and anywhere, and author of several books. Go ahead and look them up on Amazon, or you can go to virtualizationbookshelf.org, and they're all listed there, plus a curated list of books that are on virtualization and cloud topics. Joining us today is Eben Rodriguez, and I'm actually here live at NSS Labs down in Austin, Texas. Eben,
hi, everybody.
And Eben, what is your role here now? You're like the guy in charge
of virtualization and cloud testing. NSS Labs is a security test lab. We test security appliances like firewalls and whatnot. So we're helping set up a virtual and cloud test environment for that.
And with Mike Foley. Mike, what is your real role at VMware these days?
I work in the vSphere platform group in tech marketing, and I'm responsible for vSphere platform security. I'm the author of the vSphere Hardening Guide.
Which everybody, if you haven't read it, you probably should. Has lots of very, very good advice. I recently went through it myself and found some things that I would like to, I have to bring up to Mike privately. Got a list.
That's good.
For the next rev. But we're going to talk today is about testing virtual security products in a virtual and cloud environment. Specifically, how do you test them? And what should you expect as the results? And Mike, you do this you guys have been playing around with this for quite a while. I know VMware doesn't publish performance numbers, but when VMware was testing vShield, you did publish the sessions per second and stuff and elements like that, as well as bandwidth. I know those were published. So how did they test those? Do you know?
That was before my time at VMworld. So I really can't speak to that.
Okay. Well, I was wondering, what do you think is...
before my time at VMware.
Not before your time at VMworld, but okay. But
yeah.
Not to put you on the spot or anything, but how would you, if you were to set up a test like that, how would you set it up?
Well, in my opinion, it's all, if you're looking at performance numbers, it's very subjective based on the platform you're using, the other workloads that are running in that environment, understanding that a virtualized environment is shared resources. So what a VM that might have, say, 100 events per second on one particular platform, on another it might be 250 events per second with the same exact settings, because the memory subsystem's faster, the CPU is faster, the CPU has more cache. There's less resources being taxed on that box. So it's really a very subjective and, quite honestly, frustrating procedure to go through to test that sort of stuff. That's what I found when I was at RSA.
Can I ask you some questions to clarify your remarks?
Sure.
So
no, you can't.
That's what this is all about, right? So I just want to understand what you mean by events per second. Are you talking in the context of a server being protected, having so many events, or are you talking in the context of a security appliance trying to do the work of a traditional physical security appliance, being able to process so many events per second based on what platform it's running on? Which are you referring to?
I'm referring to the latter. I'm referring to a security appliance. In my particular experiences, it was with a product that captured logs from from a number of different sources, and the testing was very interesting, to say the least. In some cases, virtualization, running that particular platform on a standalone box, the same exact box that it was installed natively on, and then we installed ESXi and then the virtualized version. The difference was really in the single percentage range as far as performance went, and in some cases was actually slightly better, which we kind of put up to the better scheduling of the ESXi scheduler.
Well, that's interesting. So,
yeah.
And I know which product you're currently talking about, but since you didn't mention it, I won't. When you tested that when running on physical hardware, in virtual hardware, you're talking single percentage points differences on events per second.
Right.
So, but in some cases, the scheduling is better. So if you had more collectors, you could have gotten better performance.
Actually, it was more along the lines of better scheduling of the virtual CPUs.
Okay.
So that's interesting. We kind of started off today. We were discussing the topic for the podcast, and security testing is definitely what we're talking about. But we're like, let's not talk too much about performance. And here we are within the first 5 minutes talking about performance. So. Is that a big factor? I mean,
problem with performance. Just go before we go any further. Problem with performance, and as Mike just pointed out, is that no two hypervisors are alike. The workloads running them on are not alike, so the numbers you're going to get out of them are distinctly different. And that's why the only acceptable performance numbers to some of the hypervisor vendors are things like VMmark.
Does VMmark run on all hypervisors?
It can. But that's a pure hypervisor performance number tool, not a security testing tool.
So, Mike, do you have vendors who make security appliances? Is there someone at your company that works with them to make sure they're tuned or working properly?
That's outside of the scope of what I do. I'm primarily focused on vSphere security, and that's like a whole other organization.
I guess what I'm asking is it a configuration thing where they need to do certain things to their machine to make it work good on, say, Hyper-V or Citrix or something else, versus is it just the inherent limitation of the underlying hypervisor?
Well, I won't speak to alternative hypervisors because they don't pay my paycheck.
I'll do that for you, Mike.
I'll let Edward jump down that rat hole. The thing is, it's like I said, it's very subjective based on the platform you're running on, not just the hypervisor, but especially the server box. I mean, a Dell 1950 is, you pick which model. The one with the 3 gigahertz CPU or the one with the 2 gigahertz CPU, but the one with the 2 gigahertz CPU actually has more cores. I mean, it's all very, very subjective. So that's why when we did our testing, we tested it on this particular configuration. Your mileage may vary.
And then when you start talking about testing for things of that nature, you actually have to really document your configuration so other people can duplicate it.
Yeah.
But also, it's not only the hardware involved and the version of the hypervisor involved, but it's also, particularly for security appliances, and not just performance, just does it work, it's a technology it makes use of. So if I'm using, there's a couple of ways to do security appliances that I know of in a virtual environment. The first one is I could stick the appliance sitting out in some piece of hardware out in its own network segment, and I have to forward everything to it and get all the data back and make a decision. Standard hairpin methodology, which is anathema to most people who do virtualization. Then there is the inline approach where I stick a firewall between two virtual switches or two virtual port groups on any type of virtual switch, and say go from point A to point B, and you always pass that appliance. The third one is I make use of something that allows me to send data to a central location that is muxing the data between multiple VMs, and that muxer makes all the decisions, sends back a response. There is actually only one implementation of that in the world, and that is done through VMware's Endpoint Security version 2. Not version 1, version 2. And then you get the other one where I stick out an appliance out there virtualized. I'm using some driver in the hypervisor to maybe make decisions. This is the old VM safe technology. And then if it's not making decisions, send all the data to that VM. It makes the decisions and sends it back. Now that VM could also send it further along, again, to that single appliance to make more decisions. So you could actually send it all over your network by that point and get it back. And hey, Mike, did you know that there is actually a VM safe-like appliance now for Hyper-V?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, there is. I've been trying to get in touch with these guys. It's a company.
A Microsoft thing?
No, it's not from Microsoft. It is a non-Microsoft.
And what
company.
APIs are they using?
I have no idea. I've been trying to talk to them. I'll have to look it up, but there is one that is done. Zen has them. KVM has the capability, but there's no products out there. Zen has the capability, and I think there's maybe one or two products out there. Hyper-V actually has always had the capability, but they tie into the network stack inside the parent partition on all three of those. And that one, there's only one company I know doing it. I just can't remember the name of it. Something to do with 5.9 or something like that.
Oh, yeah, I think I've heard of that. It's a firewall for Hyper-V.
It's a firewall for Hyper-V, but it's built using the introspective technology.
Yeah, they have a virtual switch module plugged into the Hyper-V virtual switch.
So when you look at all that, now, how would you go about testing any of that? Let's just think of methodologies out there for testing. Let's pick one. Pick one of those. Anybody? Which of those five do we want to talk about?
We've been talking about that. We feel like it's important to quantify the underlying hypervisors first to see what inherent native performance hit they may or may not have, one versus the other. Just using the standard vSwitch that it comes with. Different packet sizes, like you were saying, number of new sessions per second. What are the limitations of the virtual switches that come with ESX, Hyper-V, KVM, and Zen? If Cisco, for example, or some other big company is making a virtual appliance that's supposed to protect workloads on these different hypervisors, we should know if that same appliance will perform differently, kind of like Mike was saying at the beginning of the call, on different hypervisors, different platforms. So we want to know the base performance first of the hypervisors.
Well, there's only one. No.
So
hey, Mike, how many products can you think of out there today that work across all four of the hypervisors? I can only think of one for security.
I really don't know. I don't keep up. I've got enough trouble drinking from the VMware fire hose.
Let's take a firewall, for example. Lots of companies make a virtual appliance in an OVA format that you could put on you could put in Amazon, sure. You could put anywhere. And like you said, you put two NICs on that thing.
Actually, you can't.
And you run traffic through it.
You can't put it anywhere. And the reason being is it depends on how it was built. There's only one vendor, I take that back, two vendors that I know of that have done a virtual firewall that's packaged as a virtual machine for any hypervisor, and they did it. They have unique packages for each hypervisor.
Right.
Because of the drivers you require to put in to get the performance you need. They have to put in the VMX Note 3. They need to put in the KVM
for
and Zen switches. That's all networking stack is the key, and Hyper-V has its own power virtualized
Some
drivers.
companies build their own, with like a BSD image, and then they
standard
put
Linux
monowall
BSD,
on there.
absolutely.
You'd have to figure out how to install the pair virtualized I/O drivers for each platform. So there's lots of options. there's open source options and there's also commercial options.
The commercial options are Fortinet.
Fortinet, Cisco.
Cisco does, the VSA doesn't work everywhere.
Yep. Their roadmap for the next year has been published in May at the OpenStack conference, and they have already ESX and Hyper-V support, and they're working on KVM and Zen Server. Mm-hmm. So, we're not talking specific products here, but in general, whatever product it is, if it does support 2 or 3 or 4 different hypervisors, we should have an expectation that this one hypervisor is better at throughput but has a higher latency, or someone might be lower latency, better hardware support, but less throughput, something like that. We need to know what the limits are.
The problem with that, and Mike, you probably noticed this too, is that it actually depends on the workload you have on either side of that appliance.
Right. So we're going to process a native workload. One example might be a web server. We might do database consolidation, Samba or NAS. There's different types of workloads you can put on the hypervisors, but if, like you were saying at the beginning, if you document it and script it and make it standard, so you do the same test on every different platform, you can see if there's any difference between them or not.
Yes, in my particular case, I was getting a lot of pushback from development at the time about, it won't work, and they wanted to over-provision the virtual machine with far too many virtual CPUs. That's what the hardware had. They wanted to give it more memory, and I kept saying, yeah, but it's a 32-bit operating system. It doesn't need gig. And so I finally broke down and I said, look, take the existing hardware appliance you have today, run your tests and get a baseline number. Then take that exact same box, wipe the disks, install ESXi, and put the virtual appliance on and test it with 2 gig, 4 gig, 8 gig, 1 CPU, 2 CPU, 4 CPU. And they did that, and I said, I guarantee you that two virtual CPUs and 4 gig of memory will run near native speed.
Okay.
Sure enough, they came back going, well, yeah, you were kind of right. Yeah, actually, it ran better.
Really?
So, literally by half a percentage point. So really nothing, I call that butterfly effect stuff.
So that was 2 vCPUs and 4 gigs of RAM?
3.6.
For that particular application. It's all very dependent on the application, too. So not only are your tests dependent on the underlying infrastructure and hardware, but it's also dependent upon the resources that you've given the virtual machine and the OS and application that you're running within your virtual appliance. And if you're doing things inefficiently, like in their particular case, they wanted 8 gig of memory, and I told them, but it's a 32-bit operating system. The most it'll ever see is 3.5 gig. You're wasting.
Right.
And not only that, if you think about your application, in order to make use of multiple CPUs or multiple cores, virtual or otherwise, you actually have to have a multi-threaded application or a multi-process application. If you don't have one of those and it's a standard single-threaded application, you can throw as many cores at it as you want. It will make no difference, even on physical hardware. So if this has always been the problem about virtualizing business-critical applications, that the exchanges of the world, the SQLs of the world, and other things are seriously multi-threaded. They were designed that way to make better use of cores because Microsoft Windows natively doesn't schedule things across cores unless you are threading.
Right.
Linux, on the other hand, schedules things across all cores. As long as you've got multiple processes, it's going to schedule properly.
So most security appliances are probably Linux-based.
Linux or BSD, from what I understand.
Right. And they have...
That's primarily for licensing reasons.
Yes.
Sure. It's easier to give demos away and,
I know you don't have to pay for the license if you're using an open source product.
For sure.
Like OpenBSD has a better licensing model than regular BSD and so forth. So a lot of security products are written both ways.
Yeah, that's why you'll find virtually no virtual appliances that are pre-built on Windows is because of the Microsoft licensing.
Right.
And Solaris, until they came up with the open source version of Solaris, they didn't do it either. Matter of fact, like all these storage appliances are now using a form of Solaris.
So a lot of security appliances might take advantage of custom ASICs. Like I know at the security conferences you go to for firewalls and whatnot, you hear a lot about Cavium is one of the ASIC vendors that makes, acceleration for SSL and whatnot. How would a virtual appliance compare to that? Are they able to get close to the speeds that they need for IPsec termination?
Well, I look at it. I look at it from the standpoint of, do you want to scale up or do you want to scale out?
Okay.
So
let's talk about that.
Rather than having one super duper fast box, how about I have a whole bunch of virtual machines that can be running on multiple hosts, or multiple virtual machines on one host, and the ASICs in many cases do things faster, but you're moving to virtualization for a more flexible environment, and while you may or may not get the throughput, folks like Intel and AMD are constantly adding new features in at the chip level to be able to address a lot of these shortcomings. The ability to do much faster encryption and so on and so forth are all starting to show up in newer generations of chips. There will always be a case where someone will develop a chip that does it faster, but at what cost?
Yeah, if you have AES and I-based chips, which are Westmere and higher, Westmere depending on the vendor, but most late generation Westmeres have it, and everything above that has it. You're looking at for some of this 2% overheads for encryption, where if you had to do it in the CPU without the embedded, it's like a 10 to 20% overhead. So they do make a difference what technology is in the chip.
Oh, yeah.
And for security appliances, specifically for things like SSL, that's a huge difference. So you may not need the custom ASICs.
That's the AES-NI. Yeah, that's when we're talking about high cloud security does on-the-fly encryption with that technology. I think McAfee and some others.
All of them do. But going with what Mike said, I talked to Palo Alto Networks. They finally made a virtual appliance.
Right.
Palo Alto Networks' main boxes actually have custom ASICs.
Right.
So their big engineering push was somehow to recode that custom ASIC so that it was no longer a custom ASIC. It was just straight code.
Now, was that able to use the AES-NI in any way to do some sort of acceleration?
No, they did it a different way. Yeah. They're not doing encryption.
Okay.
For IPsec, they would. For anything else, they would
So
not.
do all hypervisors support that pass-through? I remember we had a talk about that. So
yeah.
They all do?
If the chipset underneath has it, then it can be made use of inside of all the VMs that I know of. In current generation hypervisors.
Yep.
But specifically for vSphere, if you have a mixed system of chips that support it and chips that do not, you need to make sure you configure your
cluster, your data center, so they all have the same CPU.
Well, no, you can actually do the you need to configure EBC mode properly.
Yes.
And you need to check. You can even select the one higher than you are.
What is that?
Higher, you need, like, for example, if I want to mask off Westmere and higher, I need to select Westmere. So I mask off everything Westmere and higher. It's kind of an interesting thing. But that actually has a lot to do with this too. This is all going back to the hardware. The hardware has a lot to do with performance. So Palo Alto Networks, they did it by making bigger VMs. So they had more CPU, more memory, but they were seriously multi-threaded and they made use of it all. But in the case you were talking about, Mike, about scale out, right?
Yep.
If you need a lot of throughput for virtual firewalls, the recommendation that I've come out of talking to other people is to create a load balanced firewall, so that virtual firewalls are sitting behind a bigger load balancer. Load balancer takes all the stuff incoming. It gets splits up amongst all the firewalls. So if I need 1 billion requests per day, 100,000 in an hour, or let's say 100,000 in a second, and my virtual firewall can only handle 5,000 sessions per second. Well, I need a lot more of them.
So that's scale out. So then that's one of the other concerns we're looking at. So the first thing we mentioned as far as testing goes was what's the underlying performance of the hypervisor? The second thing that you made me think of right now is, can I provision new firewalls on demand? Is it easy to have them sitting there idle, or spin them up on demand? As I build out new hypervisors, will the firewall automatically be added to it and part of that load pool? How do we do that? So automation around the management and provisioning is important as well.
You have to do some really orchestrator or VCAP.
You can do a lot of that.
Go ahead, Mike.
Technically, you can do an awful lot of that. I had proposed a number of things like that in my previous position. The ability to, if you have, say, kind of a master VM that's keeping tabs on the loads of the VMs that are serving whatever functionality it does. So in this case, particularly case firewalls. If that particular VM is starting to get overloaded, then spinning up another firewall behind that spinning up another VM behind that load balancer, that would be something that the management VM should be able to recognize and then make an API call to, in the case of VMware, to vSphere to either clone a new virtual machine or start up one that's already built. But that really starts getting out of that's really the challenge. There is application vendors need to step back and start thinking about, how do I scale out? So in the case of some particular application, they've never had a load balancer in front of it.
Right.
So how do they work with load balancers, for example? If they can make their stuff work with load balancers, well, then the next step is, how do I start to automate a lot of this? Do I really want to run VMs that are sitting there doing absolutely nothing on a Saturday night at 2 a.m? This is very similar in concept to the way vSphere does distributed power management. So it starts noticing that, out of my 4 ESX servers, one of them is, all of them, the load has gone down because everyone's gone home on Friday. So I'll just start vMotioning a bunch of VMs over onto the other servers and power one off. It's similar in concept at a high level as to how some management function needs to be aware of all of the pieces in the application, and the pieces in the application could be multiple VMs, and then respond using the APIs of the infrastructure. And I don't see a lot of that happening yet, because I don't think people are really thinking through that.
Well, they have to determine if it's worth all that hassle, all that work to get it set up to save a little bit of power. That's kind of how they look at it in their minds, right?
Well, it's not really.
Yeah, well, in this case, it's not power. It's response to. Say I'm running a very large web farm for a giant retailer, and I'm getting near Christmas. I can either burst out into the cloud for some of the stuff, but some of the other stuff I want to keep within my data center, maybe all the PCI-related stuff. How then do I respond to an increase in load when marketing just put out a new sale on something? I now start seeing an increase, and now I need to spin up more servers, and that means I need to spin up more firewalls in front of those servers.
how do I do that automatically, or does that come down to someone getting on the phone saying, we need more servers?
And the thing is that I see, from a security perspective, some of the security tools, what they do is they automate some aspects of quarantining and network setup and maybe even setting up firewall rules, but they don't duplicate themselves based on load and volume.
Right.
So when they hit, it could also be the firewall knowing, okay, hey, I hit my saturation. I need to spin up another one and redirect traffic.
So is that something that we're able to test nowadays, or is that sort of like in the future still?
No, anybody can write the Puppet or Chef script, but no one has it. I know.
Yeah.
I ran it manually, but some of the issues I ran into that certain passive devices can't be assigned. Oh, certain passive devices couldn't be assigned to when vMotion happens, it would fail. And the data stores always had to be on shared storage.
Absolutely.
And I found that if you do that while I was active live, it could take several hours for that whole migration to occur versus ahead of time moving the data store over to shared and then doing the live vMotion.
Well, that all goes
back about
to
moving workloads. We're talking about spinning up new workloads.
Okay, so we're not talking about moving the VM to a different ESX server? Oh,
no, it's not about saying spinning up a new firewall, for example.
This
to handle the increased load.
That's a good point. This comes down to the cows. What's the analogy? Cows versus pets. Are your servers cows or cattle, or are they pets? What Sherry's talking about is we want to move our servers to other hypervisors because it's very important that they stay on because they're our pets. They're named. It's that, the HR server or this other server. The example Mike was talking about was a web farm used by an online retailer maybe. Those servers are cattle. So you don't ever have to move those. You have maybe sometimes you have 10 of them, sometimes you have 100. For Christmas you might go to 1,000. And they could be in North America or South America or China. And some are going on and off, depending on demand. But you're not really moving the servers. You're using a global load balancer to shift the load of the users from one data center to another. So instead of it going to 10 servers, it can grow to go to 100 servers.
But if you're scaling out your security infrastructure, you also have to, if you scale out your physical infrastructure or virtual infrastructure or cloud infrastructure, you also have to scale out your security infrastructure to handle the possible attacks. So if I'm going from normally 10,000 sessions per second on average to suddenly 1 million sessions per second, my existing firewalls just won't handle it. In fact, I don't know, and only a few out there can even handle it, and they're mostly very, very big iron. So in a virtual firewall, you have to scale it across more nodes or even more data centers and have the geographic load balancing take effect. Or you have to have local load balancing to do it. But what I was talking about was the load balance, the firewalls themselves know when they're overloaded. Because they're going to start dropping things, they should be able to tell a controller to spin up a new instance and redirect traffic. But you still have something taking all that traffic and making a decision on where to send it, which would be a load balancer. So I guess, Mike, what you're saying, in order to test this, let's say we're testing just plain firewalls for just throughput and I scale out, I'm going to need some form of load balancer as well, whether physical or virtual.
Yep.
Yes, no?
Yeah, and you're going to need the management layer to keep tabs on it and respond.
Exactly. So do you tie into VC Ops, but that doesn't get the information, so you need something that ties into whether or not you're dropping packets in your firewall to begin with, and then if you don't have it, you start dropping packets, and significantly enough, you have to spin up more and more instances. So as you scale up, it scales up with you, and it has to be done automatically. Or you can say, it only handles this number, we're going to subtract 10,000 from it, it goes above that, start scaling up. You can do it with some hard numbers too, depending on the firewall. And every firewall is different.
So I'm going to shift topics just a little bit. I'm curious about how the licensing models are changing as we go to this cattle versus pets analogy.
I'm not good. And this is not a licensing call, and I'm going to draw the line at that one.
Okay.
And none of us can talk about it because we're not lawyers.
Well, I guess the one thing that I'm observing over the last few years is that they're definitely moving to more of a subscription pay-as-you-go model. And I think that's something that we're going to be looking at as we analyze the various products, because it's not just I have 10 servers and I need to put a firewall on those 10 servers to protect them. It's like Mike was saying, it's dynamic. Sometimes you want to burst, you shift things around. So your licensing model needs to adapt to that. And network appliance vendors are having to adjust their licensing models to accommodate this new technology.
So can I just say something on that one?
Sure.
Very briefly. Sorry, Edward. The whole scenario that I played out actually plays really well for licensing models, because that management layer knows what's going on, can also collect the appropriate statistics, such that in the case of I only want to pay for this much of whatever functionality I get, but I don't want to be left hanging if I get more than that. That's called burst licensing. So your ability to then say, I'm never going to leave the customer hanging, but he is going to pay for it if that large burst of traffic comes in. And here are the statistics done by the management VM or controller that can show the bursting happening. I'm a personal believer of never leave the customer hanging. Don't put him in a situation where he's calling up in a state of emergency saying, help me not lose more money from my business.
Well, exactly, and that's the thing with appliances not being physical anymore and going to virtual is it's easy to get, as a customer, it's potentially, let's say more likely, I won't say easy, but it's definitely more likely to get yourself into financial trouble because you have a billing arrangement with your appliance vendor that says, yeah, you can use as many appliances as you want. Just put the button and download some more, and we'll send you a bill at the end of the quarter, right?
Well, remember, most networking appliances are really port-based. So you're paying per port regardless. In a virtual environment, those ports can be very large. However, on a firewall or a security solution, you really are limited to a certain number of ports.
Right.
So you're still paying per port.
So this is definitely.
And by the way, that's up to 8 ports on vSphere, and it's limited to 2 or 3 or 4 on 2 or 4 on other hypervisors. But you're still paying per port, and as long as you continue to pay per port, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Now,
I got a question
on that.
Which really comes to the thing is that now let's think. We were talking inline firewalls.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about introspective firewalls, there are no ports.
Because it's in line with the vSwitch.
It's part of the V. It sits between, well, on vSphere, it sits between the virtual NIC and the virtual switch. Not the other way around. It's not in the vSwitch. On Hyper-V, it's part of the networking stack after it traverses the vSwitch, or maybe before still. On Zen and KVM, it's during traversal. So some of the stuff. So what you're talking about, there are no ports involved except for the VNIC. But it's how many VMs are on the host. If I put 360 VMs on that host, I actually have 360 firewalls available for one each, and I have 8 VNICs per VM. I now have a huge number of ports being protected automatically.
The other thing having to do with security appliances.
But then, ignoring security appliances, how do you test the introspective layer? Because that's usually a driver in the host.
Yeah, you have to have your test equipment in the hypervisor, like a virtual test appliance. So we showed you the racks of physical test equipment that we have that we traditionally use to test physical appliances. We can run traffic through virtual appliances with that physical test equipment as well. One of the things Sherry's working on is we're going to be evaluating all the new virtual test appliances where you actually put that virtual target or virtual source and the sensors in the fabric, in the cloud. And so those sensors are now virtual appliances.
Okay, so Ixia and Spirent all have virtual form factors, which is great. By using a virtual form factor, the use of that virtual form factor will actually impact performance or impact the numbers if it's running on the same host you're trying to test on, which for an introspective layer you have to.
So again, we'll do comparisons of one versus the other, and try to use all the same hardware. And one of the things that's interesting, we might go there now, is SRIOV is supposedly a way to isolate the virtual machines from each other, but give them direct access to the hardware.
You're limited to the number you can do per host.
Right, so different hypervisors have different support.
I think the limit is 31.
No, it's 256.
Yeah.
Depends on the
endpoint.
Depends on the SRIOV implementation.
Right, whether it's SRIOV or MRIOV.
Well, none of them support MRIOV.
They do.
There's new stuff coming out. So Dell just announced their new MRIOV thing.
Well,
the hardware.
Not calling it MRIOV.
The hardware does. The hypervisor does not.
Right, but at that point, the hypervisor, all they know it as is an endpoint. They don't know that it was virtualized at a chip switch level.
Well, that's the same way they do the Palo.
But it has a special driver at the VMware level.
It still presents as SRIOV to VMware. See, vSphere only understands SRIOV. So if I have an MRIOV piece of hardware, it has to represent as SRIOV. This is how Aprius, Virtensys, and even Zygo got all of their stuff to work.
Right.
They presented MRIOV devices as SRIOV to the actual hypervisors.
Interesting.
They did it in hardware.
So a company I worked at was a competitor of Virtensys, and they actually had the chip. They made their own chip to do it. And so what they did is they took an SRIOV device and emulated a technology that allowed it to be MRIOV. So at the hardware chip level, it was SRIOV, but then it was like you're purrized to be MR.
On the other side of it, which is
on a chip in an independent box.
Yep, absolutely.
Right.
And so there was I'm not going to say the name, but there's more and more security product companies that make firewalls moving to a virtual model where they ship you a virtual box now.
Yeah.
So they're still doing a physical box that they ship you, but inside that physical box is a virtualization. Like you were mentioning, some of the switches actually have hypervisors built into them now. And more security appliances are actually hypervisors with specialized hardware that they control the hardware, but they can now slice it up different ways depending on your business needs. You could have a mail filter, a firewall, a IPS, and it's very configurable through their interface to adjust traffic.
To me, I'm not sure that would be considered a virtual security appliance.
Well, it's all about marketing, right?
No, well, I'm talking technology, not marketing. To me, that is still a physical appliance that's just doing multiple duty. I don't care if it's let's put it this way, it's not something I would put in my 100% virtualized environment.
Because you have to ship a box and a thing of cardboard, styrofoam, and plug it in with power, right?
Right.
Can't be deployed on demand. Thank you.
So to me, that is, for a 100% virtual environment, I'm looking for appliances that have a virtual form factor. In other words, they ship as an OVA, an OVF, a VMDK, a whatever Hyper-V wants to ship it as. I want all that. And when I put something in, the idea is how do you test it? I mean, do I test it using fake data from an Ixia or Spirent virtual appliance? And if I do that, how does that, I need a baseline of it running without the virtual appliance because it will impact everything. And I need to put the virtual appliance on and test that. And then I got to test it with workloads and without workloads because one workload with an Ixia, with a virtual test form factor, with a security virtual form factor in one workload will be totally different than 100 workloads behind that same security appliance. So what I see is a lot of people saying, oh, it works well with these 10 or 1, it worked great, and now I put 300 on a node, or I put 10,000 across 10 nodes, or let's say, 100 nodes. Now I have problems.
Right.
Because it wasn't designed to that, one unit was not designed to that scale. Then you need to seriously think about scale out. I mean, scaling up an appliance is great, but I mean, most of the pricing is based on memory footprint today for virtual appliances.
Hey, Mike, there was a change recently. Since Ed mentioned memory, do you know about that with the licensing on the latest update?
You mean the VRAM stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, there's plenty online to read about that.
You don't want to give a plug?
That was before my time at VMware, so.
Okay.
VMware firewall, VRAM pricing went away, except for service providers.
There we go. That's what I was asking about.
Service providers still pay.
All right. And that's because they're on that subscription model, pay as you go. Awesome.
Well, guys, I mean, we've got 10 minutes left on this. I mean, it's been interesting, but again, if someone was to take from the call, what's the best suggestion you can say for testing a virtual form factor inside of a hypervisor?
I got a question for you on that, having to do with multi-tenant environments. Would VLANs or separate Ethernets be good enough to separate a multi-tenant environment in Ed's best practice manual? Because you said that we're limited to 8 ports on a virtual firewall, for example.
Yeah, you are. Well,
so
one of them.
I'm thinking in the back of my mind, well, those are going to be trunk ports, and so I can have 4,000 different tenants on those trunk ports. So I should be able to have
each tenant should have their own firewall.
Oh, their own firewall?
Oh, yeah.
Well, what about these multi-tenant firewalls?
Then why use one? Each tenant should have their own firewall they can control.
Should they have their own vSwitch?
If you're using vCloud Director, they get their own firewall and their own vSwitch.
I thought they got their own vSwitch. I thought that was a requirement.
Or they get their own port group off of vSwitch.
Right.
Well, okay.
In OpenStack, you don't necessarily.
If you don't, you're running a weird...
Let's talk about this a little bit. What's the correct or best way, given current technology, to segregate tenants from each other and provide them their own firewall with different hypervisors?
That's the whole deployment of a firewall per tenant. That's built into most clouds out there today.
So is each tenant going to have their own firewall on every hypervisor that they have workload on?
Yes. Well, no. I take that back. They have it at the edge between the private the public network and their private network, wherever that lives.
And so the private network could be like a network overlay.
We're talking about an inline firewall here.
Okay.
So I'm inline into the edge, wherever that lives. My workloads could be on 1,000 nodes.
So let's say
I have only 1 or 2 edges.
A multi-tenant data center, and I could have a bunch of, so what we're talking about is having a tier of hypervisors for virtual appliances like firewalls, and then behind that, all the compute.
Not necessarily.
In a separate tier.
I don't know. I've seen it both ways. I've seen it where the firewall is with the tenant's VMs in the same resource pools or whatever you want to call it, and I've seen it where they've actually been on their own machines before. Mike, what have you seen? I've seen it both ways. I'm sure you have as well.
Yeah, it's very vendor specific.
I think it's 6 of these.
There's no real standard there. You know, everyone kind of spins their own thing. So I have to leave in just a few moments. But what I wanted to answer the question was, what should people be thinking about? I would say, don't treat your security solution as the same way you would a hardware box. It's really very much, there's a lot of capability within the virtual infrastructure that you can take advantage of. There's a lot of other things within the virtual infrastructure that you need to understand. Shared resources, you don't have full control of the box. You really need to start thinking about how your application works. You have to have a much better understanding about how your application works, because that is affected by the infrastructure you're running on.
Absolutely, I would go with that. So, Eben, what would you recommend to people if they're looking at this testing?
Well,
you've been researching this more than anyone.
Yeah, I'm gonna say have a agreed upon reference architecture that is sort of in common with typical deployments, and then baseline measure your architecture, set it up a lab or hardware where you can test everything, and baseline your different options. If you're looking at 2 or 3 different options, baseline them by running traffic through them and seeing if they meet your performance expectations. It's definitely one of the main things that needs to be done.
In that reference architecture, to be honest, if you're running it as a test lab is one thing. If you're running it as a, hey, I'm going to put this in production, it better mimic your production environment pretty darn close.
Yep, agreed.
The best measurement.
Don't use old equipment they have lying around in the lab.
The best measurement is 12 inches to the foot. So it should be as close to identical as possible. The other thing, the one thing I would throw in is that other than know your application, is also know how your data is going to be moving in and out of your networking for any security appliance. Because if you have to traverse your virtual or physical switches more than once, you're going to be adding more and more bottlenecks just in those areas. And that will impact the performance and capabilities of any security appliance out there. Whether it runs inline, to the side, introspective, it has to talk to a virtual appliance, or even talking to a physical appliance. You really want to limit the amount of traffic that goes over those switches. So you need to know your environment very, very well. And that's based on your apps and your current security protocols.
Is that related to having a data classification, or is that separate?
I think that's separate. Data classification is more about trust zones than it is anything else. I'm thinking...
I'll see you guys later.
All right, bye, Mike.
I'm thinking that this is really about understanding your data flow. How does your data move around your environment? So if I'm going to, for example, a lot of security appliances are put out where I have to go to the central security appliance to make a decision, and it comes back across the same network path. Well, that doubles my traffic through my virtual environment.
Right.
I have to go in, then back out, and then back in. It could actually triple it.
I see what you're saying.
So knowing how things move will tell you what you need to optimize. Right. It'll tell you whether or not you really need a big piece of iron out there, or you need a virtual form factor of that.
You can't just take a application server running in your data center and move it to a virtual or cloud environment with all the security stuff without understanding the data flow.
Exactly. I think
there's databases it might need to talk to. It might need to go through different IPSs or data loss prevention appliances.
Exactly.
It might need to talk to this Active Directory server or this DNS server or something, a logging server.
Or even an encryption server for HSM.
And if you don't know where all those are and how they interact, you're just asking for performance or some other sort of trouble by moving that machine to the cloud.
Well, it's not just moving to the cloud, it's moving into any virtual environment. But it also means that if you're testing security in that environment or security appliance for whatever reason, are you mimicking what's really happening? Understanding that data flow will help you build a better test.
That's hard to do, I'll tell you.
Oh,
a
absolutely.
lot of enterprises, especially with legacy applications, they don't know how it was set up and where it's talking to.
But interesting, Microsoft Hyper-V, they have something very similar where before you do a node failover, you can run a test and it'll check all that to make sure all your privileges for your applications moving over are set.
Right.
Your performance, they'll give you red, yellow warnings, red.
So it's kind of a pre-check.
It is.
And vSphere has the same thing with its HA and its DRS. And matter of fact, there's actually new features that do the same thing to ensure that the motion will happen based on the name of network switches and everything else to say, yes, it can go over with storage in the works. And Zen and KVM also have the same things, because that type of intelligence is extremely important. But when you start talking about all security appliances, that's checking the underlying hardware and resources. It's not checking security resources, which is different. So one thing, for example, in my environment, I had a security appliance that was doing endpoint security. It's a pretty common one. And when I I put in a brand new node, and when I moved the workloads over there, everything stopped. That's because I didn't set up the security appliance, because it's a per node security appliance. So when you actually deploy a new node, you have to deploy all the security appliances to move everything over to it. So this is a thing that will cause certain introspective technologies to just break. Yep. And then you need to know, and by the way, VMware solves that problem by doing big things that say fail open or fail close at the very, very top. How do you want to handle that case? Other ones will just fail closed because they don't have that capability. So you need to know, again, how is the data moving? In this case, it was moving from the VM to another virtual machine on the same host using a vSwitch that no one knew about, and then talking to the network. And that is the key that you need to worry about, is how does the data move, and you've got to understand it. I think that's the best thing you can take out is if you're going to test security, understand how your data is moving around your network. For network-based security, for storage security, how's it moving around your storage fabric? And for things that are not storage or networking, like endpoint security, you would think it would not be either. You know, there may be some networking components in that. And data loss prevention or data security may be using other introspective technologies to get the same thing, and you don't know how those work. You've got to understand all of that to make that decision.
Absolutely.
Last thoughts?
I could put in a plug for NSS Labs. Go to our website. We've got some good research on there. Read our blog. Ed has a great blog, too.
You're also hiring, aren't you?
We're hiring, yep. Send us your resumes. We're in Austin, Texas. So, and that's it for the podcast this week. I would like to thank Eben Rodriguez and Mike Foley for joining us, as well as Sherry, one of Eben's colleagues. And we are live from NSS Labs this week, so look forward to talking to everybody later. Have a great week. This end call.